My name is Emily Ratajkowski, and I am 41 years old. And there is one sentence, one single, specific, devastating sentence, that I have been trying to figure out how to say out loud for 3 years, because the moment I say it, everything that came after it starts to make sense, and making sense of it is almost more painful than not knowing. My husband forged my signature on a second mortgage, borrowed $340,000 against the home I thought we owned together, drained our joint savings account down to $214, divorced me while I was still reeling, and then, when I finally pulled on the right thread, I watched the entire empire of lies he had constructed over 11 years collapse into rubble at his feet. He left me with nothing, or so he believed. Then last spring, a certified letter arrived from the county recorder's office addressed to me, requesting my response to a notice of default on a mortgage I had never heard of, never signed, never agreed to, and I sat down on my kitchen floor with that letter in both hands and felt something cold and clear move through me. Not anger, not grief, something older and quieter than both of those things, recognition. Before we get into this, I need you to understand something. I am not a vengeful person. I have never been a vengeful person. I was raised by a mother who believed that a woman's greatest virtue was her patience, and I spent 20 years performing that patience like a second job. I was patient when my graduate school professors dismissed my thesis ideas. I was patient when my colleagues got promoted above me for work I had largely done. I was patient when Marcus, my then husband, told me for the 7th time in 3 years that his business just needed one more push, and could I please not mention the credit card statement this month? But there is a difference between patience and blindness, and the letter from the county recorder's office cured me permanently and completely of the second one. I met Marcus Henley in the fall of 2008, when I was 28 years old and he was 32. I was finishing my MBA at a state university in Ohio, working part-time as a financial analyst for a mid-sized regional bank, living in a studio apartment with a radiator that clanged every 45 minutes like clockwork. He was charismatic and tall and laughed easily, and had the kind of confidence that I had spent my entire adult life trying to cultivate and never quite managing to grow. I grew up in a household where money was present but never discussed, which is its own special kind of financial trauma. My father was a civil engineer who worked long hours and brought home a reliable paycheck, and believed that the purpose of money was to not talk about it. My mother managed the household accounts with a severity that bordered on devotion, clipping coupons and tracking grocery receipts in a green spiral notebook she kept in the kitchen drawer next to the takeout menus. We were comfortable. We were never told we were comfortable. Money was the invisible current running beneath everything in that house, present everywhere, acknowledged nowhere. So when I got older and started making my own, I didn't know what to do with it. I saved it the way my mother had taught me, carefully, methodically, without joy. I had a Roth IRA by the time I was 24. I kept 6 months of expenses in a high-yield savings account. I read every line of every financial document I signed. I was, in the language of the personal finance subreddits I would discover years later, doing everything right. And then I met Marcus. Marcus talked about money the way I had always wanted someone to talk about it, openly, excitedly, with the kind of easy fluency that suggested it was not a source of anxiety for him, but a game he had already figured out how to win. He described business ideas at dinner like other people described dreams, vivid and elaborate and luminous. He had theories about markets and consumer behavior and the psychology of branding that sounded, to my banker's ear, almost plausible. He was magnetic in the way that certain people are magnetic. You felt in his presence like you were standing close to a fire. We were married in June of 2010. I was 30 years old. I wore a dress that cost $800, which Marcus said was too conservative, and I said was perfectly appropriate, and we smiled at each other in the photo that would sit on our mantel for the next 11 years. The first year was good. I will say that honestly, the first year was genuinely good. We bought a house in a suburb of Columbus, a 3-bedroom colonial with a porch and a backyard and a kitchen that needed updating, which we talked about updating and never did. I was promoted to senior analyst at the bank. Marcus was working for a marketing consulting firm, making decent money, talking about eventually starting something of his own. We had dinner with friends on Fridays, and hiked on Sundays and argued about nothing serious and made up quickly. The first sign, looking back, was so small I would have needed a microscope to see it. It was a Sunday in March of 2011, 18 months into our marriage. I was sitting at the kitchen table with our joint account statement, the way I did every month, and Marcus walked in and looked at what I was doing and said, with a lightness that I only later recognized as practiced, "You know, you don't have to do that every month. We're fine." "I know we're fine," I said. "I like to know we're fine." He poured himself coffee and leaned against the counter. "It's just a lot of energy to spend on something that's already being handled." "By whom?" I asked, and he shrugged and said, "By us, by the way we live. We're not irresponsible people, Emily." I looked at him for a moment. Then I looked back at the statement. Then I closed the folder and put it back in the filing drawer, because in that moment I wanted, more than I wanted to know the numbers, to believe what he was saying. That was my first mistake. The second sign came in 2013 when Marcus left his consulting job to start his first company. He called it a market research platform, something about aggregating consumer sentiment data and selling it to small businesses. He had a pitch deck. He had a logo. He had a vision, and the vision was detailed enough and specific enough that I, a trained financial analyst who should have known better, looked at it and thought, maybe. I contributed $40,000 from our savings to the startup. It was, Marcus told me, a conservative and strategic investment in our shared future. I believed him, which I can only explain by saying that I had spent 3 years marinating in his certainty, and certainty is contagious. The market research platform lasted 14 months. It dissolved, quietly and without drama, in the spring of 2014. Marcus said the market wasn't ready. He was not visibly devastated. He moved on with an equanimity I now understand was not the equanimity of a resilient person, but the equanimity of someone who had never truly believed in what they were doing, who had been, from the beginning, playing a different game than the one I thought we were both playing. We recovered financially, or I thought we recovered. I got a substantial raise. I paid off the credit card balances Marcus had run up during the startup phase, a total of $28,000 across 3 cards without a word of accusation, because I believed in the partnership and I believed in him. I rebuilt our savings. I put us back on solid ground. Then in 2016 there was the second business, an e-commerce brand selling specialty kitchen equipment, high-end cutting boards, artisanal knives, that sort of thing. Marcus had convinced himself, and nearly convinced me, that the market for premium kitchenware was dramatically underserved at the mid-range price point. He had done his research this time, he said. He had focus groups. He had a supplier in Germany with an exclusive distribution deal. I gave him $55,000. We took out a small business loan for $80,000 that I co-signed, believing this was what married people did, they bet on each other. The kitchen supply company lasted 22 months. The German supplier turned out to have a distribution deal with 3 other companies simultaneously, which made the exclusive part of the arrangement technically fictional. The e-commerce platform fees ate the margins alive. The loan had to be paid back, which we did, slowly and painfully, over the next 3 years. It was bad luck, Marcus told me, and he said it with such genuine feeling that I almost believed the bad luck was the whole story. In 2019, he found what he called his real idea. He'd spent months on it, he said. He had a business partner named David Cho, whom I'd met twice at dinner, and who had the slightly glazed energy of someone who had invested a lot of borrowed confidence in a plan they hadn't fully examined. The idea was a logistics software company that would help small freight businesses manage their fleet operations, routing, scheduling, maintenance tracking, driver communication, all on one platform. Marcus had quotes from potential clients. He had a technical co-founder named Reza who was apparently brilliant and already building the prototype. He needed $120,000 to get to a fundable stage. He needed it from us. I sat with that number for a week. I ran the projections. I read the business plan, actually read it, every page, and asked questions and pushed back on the assumptions and requested a meeting with Reza, which Marcus arranged and which seemed to go well. I was thorough. I was careful. I was a senior financial analyst with 15 years of experience, and I did everything that a person in my position was supposed to do. And then I said yes, because he was my husband and I loved him, and the plan was, on paper, not insane. That was the summer of 2019. By the following spring, the COVID-19 pandemic had arrived, and the logistics software company, which had been limping along on hope and delays, simply stopped. Reza moved back to California. David Cho disappeared from our lives entirely. Marcus pivoted to consulting, and spent 8 months on the phone making calls that I gradually understood were not leading to anything. Our savings were mostly gone by then. Not all at once. Marcus had always been careful to keep just enough in the account that I wouldn't feel the alarm bells, like a frog in water that is warming so gradually it never registers the danger. But the summer of 2020 was the first time in my adult life that I looked at our bank balance and felt genuine, bone-deep fear. I raised it with Marcus on a Wednesday night in August. I had a spreadsheet. I had months of statements. I had a presentation, essentially, not because I wanted to have a presentation, but because I knew from 11 years of being married to him that if I didn't have hard numbers in front of us both, the conversation would drift into abstraction and I would end up being managed rather than heard. Marcus, I said, we have $18,400 in savings. I have gone back through the last 18 months of statements and I cannot account for $73,000 that should be in this account. He looked at the spreadsheet for a long moment, then he said, "That's the startup cost. I told you about most of that." "You told me about 40 of it," I said. "Where is the other 33? And he looked at me, really looked at me, for what felt like the first time in a very long while and said, "Emily, I am doing my best. I need you to trust me." I remember looking at him across the kitchen table and thinking, with a clarity that I could not quite yet reach the bottom of, he just answered a question I didn't ask. I did not say that out loud. I put the spreadsheet away. I went to bed. 3 months later, in November of 2020, Marcus told me he wanted a divorce. He said it in the living room on a Tuesday evening with the same mild reasonableness with which he had once told me he thought we should repaint the porch. He was not cruel about it. He did not raise his voice. He said that he felt we had grown in different directions and that he didn't think either of them was wrong, just incompatible. He said he had a lot of respect for me. He said he hoped we could do this in a way that was amicable and fair. I sat on the couch and listened to him say all of these things and felt the ground disappear beneath me. Looking back, the thing I remember most clearly is not the grief, though the grief was enormous, oceanic, the kind that fills your lungs and makes it difficult to breathe for weeks on end. What I remember most clearly is the practical terror. Because I was 40 years old, and our savings were almost gone, and we had a mortgage on a house that I had believed was essentially paid down, and now the man I had trusted with my financial life was sitting across the living room from me telling me calmly that he was leaving. We hired separate attorneys. I hired mine, a woman named Carol Watkins who had a small practice downtown and who wore reading glasses on a chain and spoke with the measured precision of someone who had heard every version of every story and was not surprised by any of it within a week of Marcus's announcement. I gathered every financial document I could find, bank statements going back 5 years, tax returns, the mortgage paperwork, the joint brokerage account such as it was, our retirement account statements, the mortgage paperwork. I remember sitting at Carol's desk in January of 2021, going through the stack of documents and pulling out the mortgage statement and setting it on the desk and then pausing, physically pausing, my hands going still, because the number I was looking at was not the number I remembered. "Carol," I said, "how many mortgages do we have on the house?" She looked up from the document she was reading. "What's on the statement?" "The balance here is $287,000. We bought the house in 2010 for $310,000. We've been making payments for 10 years. This doesn't make sense." She put down her reading glasses and looked at the statement carefully. Then she looked at me. "Do you have your original loan documents?" I did not have them in that folder. I went home and looked for them. I found the original closing documents from 2010, which showed a purchase price of $310,000 and a mortgage of $248,000. If we had made payments for 10 years at our original rate, the balance should have been somewhere around $198,000, not $287,000. The balance had gone up. I called Carol. She was quiet for a moment on the other end of the line. Then she said, "Emily, I need you to go to the county recorder's office and pull the full title history on your house." I drove there the next morning. I sat at the public records terminal and put in our address and watched the screen populate with what should have been one entry, our 2010 purchase mortgage, and instead produced 2. The second mortgage had been recorded in 2018. It was for $340,000. It was, according to the document, held by both Marcus Henley and Emily Ratajkowski. My signature was on it. I had never signed it. I know what you're thinking because it's what I thought too. Is it possible you just forgot? And I want to tell you that I spent 3 solid days asking myself that question, turning my memory inside out, trying to locate some version of reality in which I had sat at a closing table in 2018 and put my name on a $340,000 loan, and then completely erased that memory from my consciousness. I am a financial analyst. I read every document I sign. I could not have forgotten this. I had not forgotten, because I had not been there, because I had not signed. Someone had signed for me. I called Carol from my car in the county recorder's parking lot. My hands were shaking, not with fear exactly, but with the specific physical reaction that happens when your body understands something approximately 30 seconds before your brain fully catches up. I told her what I had found. She was quiet. Then she said, with the careful neutrality of someone trying very hard not to say what she was actually thinking, "Emily, do you know a forensic document examiner?" I did not, but I knew people who did. I spent February of 2021 methodically gathering evidence. This was the part that I think people underestimate when they hear the end of this story, the part that came between finding out and doing something about it. It was not dramatic. It was not a montage. It was 6 weeks of sitting at my kitchen table at 11 o'clock at night with a highlighter and a scanner and a legal pad, building a case one document at a time, because I understood, in the way that you understand something when you have spent 15 years working in finance, that the only thing that was going to save me was overwhelming, irrefutable, meticulously organized proof. I hired a forensic document examiner named Dr. Margaret Osei, who had 30 years of experience and testified regularly in county and federal court proceedings. She examined the 2018 mortgage documents alongside 5 samples of my genuine signature, from tax returns, from our original 2010 mortgage, from other legal documents with verified dates, and concluded in a 12-page report that the signature on the 2018 mortgage was not mine. The pen pressure was wrong. The letter formations were inconsistent with my natural hand. There were small but measurable differences in the angularity of my capital R and the loop structure of my lowercase k that she could demonstrate with overlaid imaging. She also noted, in a section I found particularly cold-blooded in the best possible way, that whoever had forged the signature had clearly practiced it. The forgery was not crude. It was sophisticated enough that a non-expert would not have flagged it, but it was not hers. It was not mine. Marcus had spent $340,000 of debt forged in my name. Where had it gone? That was the next thread. Carol referred me to a forensic accountant named James Park, who had a background in bank fraud investigation. I paid him $4,500, which I put on a credit card because I had no other option, and over the course of 3 weeks, he traced the $340,000 through a series of transfers that were not in themselves illegal, but the trail they made was damning. The money had moved from the second mortgage lender into a business account held in Marcus's name only. From there, a large portion had gone to something called Henley Capital Partners LLC, which was a Delaware-registered entity that Marcus had apparently formed in 2017 without my knowledge. Another portion had gone to pay back what appeared to be personal loans, not from a bank, but from individuals, whose names I did not recognize but whose addresses were in Nevada and Florida. The remainder appeared to have been spent on things that did not obviously connect to any legitimate business purpose: hotel stays, restaurant bills, travel. Marcus had taken $340,000 of debt secured against my home and my name, and spent it on a shell company and personal expenses and debts he had accumulated that he had never told me about. And he had done it in 2018, 2 years before he asked me for the divorce. I want to pause here and tell you something that I think is important, because I have had a lot of time to think about it, and I believe I have finally worked out the shape of it. There is a particular kind of man, and I want to be careful here because I have met women who do this too, and I don't think it's gender specific. There is a particular kind of person who does not experience relationships as partnerships but as resources, who approaches the question of who to marry not with the question, who do I want to build a life with, but with the more practical question of who will give me the most room to operate. Who looks for someone competent and trusting and slightly too willing to believe the best interpretation of events, because that combination, competence and trust, and the desire to believe, is the most useful combination you can find in a person you intend to exploit. I was useful to Marcus. I want to say that plainly. I was useful because I made good money and managed our finances carefully and asked questions, but could be managed out of asking too many, and because I loved him and love makes you extend credit in ways that pure logic never would. I was useful because I worked in finance and had good credit, and was exactly the kind of co-borrower that a lender would look favorably upon. I was useful because when he needed someone's signature on a second mortgage, mine was the one worth forging. I don't tell you this to make you feel sorry for me. I tell you because I think it's important to understand that what happened to me didn't happen because I was stupid. It happened because I was trusting, and because I believed in the institution of my marriage, and because the person I was married to understood both of those things precisely and used them. That is not my failure. I have had to tell myself that many times in the last 3 years, and I am finally beginning to believe it. Carol filed for an emergency motion to halt the divorce proceedings in March of 2021, citing newly discovered evidence of financial fraud. She also filed a police report on my behalf with the Columbus Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit. The detective assigned to the case was a woman named Detective Aisha Monroe, who had a calm, unhurried manner and who looked at the forensic report and the accountant's findings and James Park's trace of the money and said, with the same neutrality that Carol had used but somehow even more devastating for it, "This is a fairly complete picture." Marcus's attorney attempted 3 times over the following month to negotiate a settlement that would have required me to accept partial liability for the second mortgage in exchange for a faster divorce settlement. The first time, Carol declined. The second time, Carol declined with a specific and enumerated list of reasons. The third time, Carol sent over a copy of Dr. Osai's forensic report and a copy of Detective Monroe's preliminary findings, and we did not hear back for 11 days. When we did hear back, Marcus's attorney had changed. The new attorney came in with a different posture entirely, less negotiation and more damage control. There was a meeting in April of 2021, in a conference room at Carol's office, with Marcus and his attorney and Carol and me, and Marcus walked in looking the way that people look when they have been running a certain story inside their own heads for so long that they have forgotten it is a story, slightly surprised to find the rest of the world declining to play along. He sat down across the table from me, and I looked at him for the first time in 3 months and thought, there you are, the real one, the one underneath all the charm and the vision and the confidence, this thin, frightened man who has run out of room. I did not say that. I sat across from him and let Carol do the talking, which is what I had paid her to do. Carol laid out the evidence, the forged signature, the undisclosed second mortgage, the forensic report, the trace of funds into Henley Capital Partners, the pattern of transfers, the individual creditors in Nevada and Florida, 2 of whom had since filed their own civil suits against Marcus for the personal loans he had apparently not repaid. She laid it out in the clear, measured language of someone presenting a set of established facts, and when she was done, the room was very quiet. Marcus's attorney said, "Our position is..." Carol said, "Your position is that this goes to the DA's office or we reach an agreement today. I've already made initial contact. The detective on the case has described the evidence as comprehensive. This is not a negotiation about the facts. This is a conversation about what Marcus does next." Marcus looked at me across the table. I had been looking at the middle distance at the space approximately 2 feet to the left of his right ear, but when I felt his eyes I brought mine back to his face. I thought about 11 years. I thought about the house with the porch that needed painting and the kitchen we never updated. I thought about the $40,000 and the $55,000 and the $120,000 and the co-send loan and the credit cards and the $340,000 in a mortgage I never signed. I thought about sitting at the kitchen table with my spreadsheet in August of 2020 and hearing him say, "Emily, I need you to trust me." I did not say anything. I just looked at him until he looked away. The agreement we reached that afternoon was this: Marcus would sign over full ownership of the house to me, unencumbered, with the second mortgage to be fully his liability. He would provide documentation of his personal assets, sufficient to demonstrate his ability to service the second mortgage debt. He would contribute a negotiated settlement to account for the years of financial mismanagement and the fraudulent debt. He would provide a signed affidavit acknowledging that the 2018 mortgage signature was not mine, which Carol explained to him carefully. He was providing in lieu of a criminal referral, for now, though Detective Monroe's case remained open. His attorney negotiated hard on the settlement number. Carol negotiated harder. We settled on $215,000, payable over 5 years, secured against his personal assets. He also signed the house over to me, which eliminated approximately $287,000 in encumbered equity and gave me a clean deed on an asset worth, in the current market, approximately $420,000. Marcus Henley left that conference room with a civil liability of $555,000, criminal exposure on a forged document charge, and the Nevada and Florida creditors circling. His personal assets as documented during the divorce proceedings were not sufficient to absorb all of that. He had a car, a small brokerage account, some equipment from the logistics company. He did not have a business. He did not have a savings account worth mentioning. He had been, as it turned out, operating on borrowed money and borrowed time for approximately 6 years, and now both had run out simultaneously. Carol told me about 18 months after the divorce was finalized that Marcus had filed for personal bankruptcy. I looked at that information for a moment. Then I set it down, the way you set something down when you understand that picking it up again will not change what it is. I want to tell you about the 6 months between finding the second mortgage and sitting in that conference room, because I think those 6 months are the most important part of this story, more important than the conference room, more important than the forensic report, more important than the bankruptcy. I was alone, let me be clear about that. I had friends, yes, a small circle of women I had known since my 20s who called and texted, and showed up with food in the weeks after Marcus left. I had my colleagues at the bank, who were kind in the wordless way that professional colleagues are kind. I had Carol, who was competent and dependable and genuinely on my side. But I was, in the specific sense of someone whose entire adult life has been structured around a partnership that has just been revealed to be a fiction, profoundly alone. I was in my house as it turned out, though I did not yet know that, sitting at the kitchen table with documents spread across the surface, building a case, making phone calls, being very practical and very organized and very competent. And behind all of that, I was conducting the most difficult reckoning of my adult life. Because here is the thing about discovering that you have been systematically lied to over a period of years. It does not feel like discovering something new. It feels like every past moment rearranging itself. It feels like watching a film you have already seen and realizing, with a sickness that goes all the way down, that you were watching the wrong version. Every conversation I could remember, every financial decision I thought we had made together, every moment I had understood as evidence of a partnership, all of it recontextualized, all of it reorganized around the new information, all of it now meaning something different than I had believed it meant. The $40,000 in 2013, was that the point at which he realized I could be managed, or had he known from the beginning? The spreadsheet in August of 2020. He had told me to trust him. Had he known then that the mortgage already existed? Had he known that he was weeks away from filing for divorce and that by doing so he would be handing me, potentially, an enormous legal liability that I had not agreed to and did not know about? I do not know the answers to all of these questions. What I know is that the person I had loved and trusted and built my adult life around had been engaging in a sustained, deliberate, sophisticated deception for at least 6 years, and possibly from the beginning. And I had been not because I was stupid, but because I was trusting exactly the right person to deceive. The reckoning took place in my kitchen in the middle of the night over many weeks. It took the form of questions I had never allowed myself to ask and answers I had to sit with until I could hold them without falling apart. It was not clean. It was not linear. It was the kind of work that does not show on your face or your calendar and that no one can do for you. What I came out of it with not right away but slowly over months was something I had not expected. Clarity, not happiness, not peace exactly. Clarity, a clean, hard understanding of who I was, what I had built, the career, the financial skills, the independent competence that had operated quietly beneath the marriage like a floor under a house, and what I was going to do next. I was not going to spend 1 minute of my remaining life waiting for someone to see me. I had already spent 11 years being useful to someone who had never truly seen me. I was done with being useful in that particular way. What I was going to do was win. The divorce was finalized in September of 2021. I was 41 years old. I owned a house outright. I had a career. I had $215,000 coming to me over 5 years from a man who was already in the early stages of insolvency, which meant the probability of collecting all of it was somewhere between modest and optimistic. But Carol had secured the first 2 payments in advance, which gave me actual money, actual cash, in a savings account that belonged to me alone. I also had the knowledge that the forged mortgage was not my liability. The second mortgage company had been notified of the fraudulent signature and was pursuing Marcus directly. His name, not mine, was on the notice of default. The certified letter I received from the county recorder's office in the spring of 2022, the one I mentioned at the beginning of this story, was not, as I initially feared, a claim against me. It was a notification to me as a party of interest in the property, which I was still technically listed as on the original filing, before the legal corrections had fully propagated through the recording system. My attorney made a single call. The matter was resolved in 48 hours. But sitting on that kitchen floor holding the letter, feeling the cold clarity move through me, that moment mattered. Not because I was afraid, though the first 10 minutes involved genuine fear. It mattered because it was the moment I understood completely and physically, and without any room for doubt, that I had done it, that I had come through the other side, that the system I had built, the evidence, the attorneys, the forensic experts, the police report, the negotiations had held. That the work I had done in those 6 months of kitchen table nights had been worth exactly what it cost me. I sat on that floor for a long time after I had made the call to Carol's office. The afternoon light was coming through the back window at an angle that hit the dust motes drifting in the air above the kitchen table and made them briefly visible, briefly luminous, the way light sometimes does in empty rooms. I thought about the first house Marcus and I had ever looked at together, before we bought this one, a Cape Cod with a cracked foundation that we had toured on a rainy Saturday in 2009, and looked at each other and silently agreed, not this one. I thought about how certain I had been, walking out of that Cape Cod, that we were doing it right, that we had the instincts for this, for choosing correctly, for building something solid. I am 41 years old. I own a house with a porch and a kitchen that still needs updating, and a backyard where the grass grows unevenly, and a spare bedroom that is full of books I have been meaning to organize for 2 years. I go to work every morning and I do my job, which I am good at, which I have always been good at, and I come home to a space that is fully mine. I have friends who come for dinner on Fridays, which is a thing I started doing deliberately and which has become, quietly and without announcement, one of the things I most look forward to in my week. I have not begun dating again. This is a choice, not a failure. I am relearning what it means to make choices for myself, not as a compromise with another person's vision or a contribution to a shared project, but simply because I want to, because it is right for me, because I am the person who gets to decide. It turns out that this is a skill that requires practice. I am practicing. There is something I want to say about the financial piece of this, because I have seen versions of this story told in ways that flatten the financial dimension into a simple lesson. He stole from you and you got it back, the end, and that flattening makes me feel like something important is being missed. What Marcus did was not just steal money. What he did was systematically and deliberately compromise my financial identity. A mortgage forged in my name is not just a dollar amount, it is my credit history, my legal standing, my name on a county recorder's document in the public record. It is the kind of liability that can follow a person for years, that can appear on credit reports and affect lending decisions and make landlords hesitate. It is not, in other words, just money. It is the institutional architecture of a person's financial life, and he touched all of it. That is why the forensic work mattered so much. That is why I hired the document examiner and the accountant and let them spend weeks building a picture that was not just morally convincing but legally and evidentially bulletproof, because the goal was not just to feel right about what had happened. The goal was to have the record be right, to have the documents say the true thing instead of the false thing, to have my name mean what my name was supposed to mean. I think about this a lot when I think about women in financially entangled relationships, not just marriages, but any arrangement in which 2 people's financial lives overlap. The temptation when things go wrong is to focus on the emotional story. And the emotional story is real and it matters, but the financial story is also real, and it will outlast the emotional story, and it is worth treating with the same seriousness. The same rigor, the same refusal to accept the convenient version. Read every document you sign. I said that to a younger colleague recently. She was being walked through some household paperwork by her partner and had done what I did, which was to trust that the other person had read it, and I said it directly and without softening it. Read every document you sign. Not because your partner is untrustworthy, most partners are not Marcus Henley, but because your name is a legal instrument and you are the only person who is responsible for how it is used. That is the most practical thing this experience taught me. I want to give it to you clearly without decoration. In November of 2022, I received word through Carol that Marcus had officially declared personal bankruptcy under Chapter 7. His assets were liquidated. His debts, including the remaining payments on the settlement he owed me, were discharged, which meant I would not collect the approximately $140,000 that remained on the payment schedule. That money was gone. I want to be honest with you about how I felt when I got that news. I want to be honest because I think the cleaned-up version, the version where the protagonist receives bad news with equanimity and sees the larger picture and is grateful for what she has, is a lie, or at best a simplification, and I have spent enough of my life living in simplifications. I was angry, not the furious, kinetic anger of the early days, the cold, clarifying anger that had propelled me through those 6 months of kitchen table nights, but a different kind of anger, quieter and more tired, the anger of someone who did everything right and still didn't get everything back. The anger of knowing that the system that had protected me, the forensic evidence, the police report, the negotiated settlement, could not protect me from the fact that a man who has nothing left cannot pay what he owes. I sat with that anger for a few weeks. I did not perform equanimity. I called my friend Josephine, who has known me since graduate school and who has the gift of listening without rushing toward resolution, and I said, "I'm not going to get the rest of the money." And she said, "I know." And I said, "I did everything right." And she said, "I know." And we sat on the phone for a while without either of us saying anything, which was exactly what I needed. Then I did the math. What I had, the house worth approximately $420,000 in the current market, fully mine, the first 2 settlement payments already received, my salary, my retirement accounts, which I had continued to fund through the marriage at a rate that Marcus had occasionally suggested was excessive, my credit score, which was now untouched by the second mortgage because Dr. Osai's report and the subsequent legal corrections had ensured that liability was correctly attributed, my career. What I had was not nothing. What I had was not everything I was owed, but it was real and it was mine, and no one was going to take it from me. I refinished the kitchen in January of 2023, not because I needed to do it immediately, but because I had been looking at those cabinets for 12 years and I had always wanted to update them, and it had always been deferred or discussed or decided against, and now there was no one to defer to, no one to discuss it with, no one to decide against. I hired a contractor. I chose the cabinets. I chose the countertops. I stood in that kitchen the day the work was finished and put my hand flat on the new countertop and felt the cool solidity of it and thought, mine. Marcus and I have spoken twice since the divorce was finalized. Both times were initiated by his attorney regarding logistics of the property transfer, and both times were brief and businesslike and entirely without emotion. I do not know where he lives now. I do not know if he has found another person to attach himself to, another system to operate within, another story to tell about potential and vision, and just needing one more push. I hope, genuinely and without irony, that he has not for my sake, but for the sake of whoever that person would be. I have spent some time in the quiet of my own mind trying to understand him. Not to forgive him. I am not interested in forgiveness as a transaction, as something I owe him or owe myself, but to understand what it is that makes a person capable of this. The sustained nature of it, the years of it, the careful management of information and perception, the signature, practiced until it was good enough to fool a notary. What I have arrived at, provisionally and with the acknowledgement that I am not a psychologist, and this is not a professional assessment, is this: Marcus never believed the life I thought we were building was real. He believed in the vision that much seems true, or at least it was true in the beginning. He believed in the idea of the businesses, in the idea of himself as someone building something. But he did not believe in the actual work, the actual risk, the actual responsibility of putting your own name on the line and accepting the consequences if it doesn't work. He needed someone else's resources to fund the vision, and someone else's credit to absorb the risk, and someone else's good faith to bridge the gaps when reality failed to cooperate with his expectations. He was not building with me, he was building on me. And when the foundation cracked, when the money ran out and the businesses had failed and the personal loans from Nevada and Florida were coming due and the logistics software was a memory, he did not stop. He did not come to me and say, "I have made a serious mistake and I need your help to face it." He found another solution, which was a solution that added to his resources by subtracting from mine, and he executed it with the same practiced confidence that had characterized every earlier maneuver. I think on some level he believed he could manage this too, that he could get the $340,000, use it to buy himself time, find the next thing, and that by the time I found out, if I found out, there would be enough success to smooth it over. He had always been able to smooth things over before. He had always been able to find the version of reality that was most tolerable to me and present it convincingly. What he did not account for was the forensic document examiner. What he did not account for was Detective Monroe's patience and thoroughness. What he did not account for was Carol Watkins, who had heard every version of every story and was not surprised by any of it, which meant she could not be managed. What he did not account for was me, the version of me that spent 6 months at the kitchen table building a case that was irrefutable, the version of me that went to the county recorder's office and sat at the public records terminal and pulled the full title history and felt the ground disappear, and then, instead of breaking, started making calls. He had miscalculated. He had mistaken my patience for passivity. He had confused my willingness to trust him with an inability to see without his interpretation. That is the thing about being genuinely competent in a quiet way, in a way that doesn't announce itself, in a way that operates in the background of someone else's louder story. Eventually you get to use it, quietly, methodically, overwhelmingly. My name is Emily Ratajkowski, and I am 41 years old. I live in a house with refinished cabinets and a porch that I painted last spring, a deep, warm green that I chose because I wanted to, because no one was going to tell me it was too bold. The kitchen table where I built my case is still the same table. I eat breakfast at it every morning, and sometimes, when the light is right, I think about those nights and feel something that is not quite pride and not quite grief, but something in between, the particular satisfaction of having done what needed to be done in circumstances where doing it cost everything you had. I'm not going to tell you that the betrayal didn't break something. It did. Something broke in me during those years, something that was already cracked, I think, some belief in my own judgment that had been quietly fracturing since 2013 and that finally gave way in the months after Marcus left. I have spent 2 years rebuilding it, and I am honest enough to tell you that it is not fully rebuilt. I am more careful now than I was. I am more watchful. I hold information closer and share it more slowly. I verify things that I used to take on faith. That is a loss. I want to name it as a loss because I think there is a version of this story that treats the increased vigilance as a straightforward gain, as wisdom, and it is wisdom, but it came at a price, and the price was a kind of openness that I used to have and that I am not sure I will fully recover. I am at peace with that mostly. I am working on it. Always. But here is what I want to give you, if you are reading this because you recognize something in it. If you are sitting somewhere right now with a document or a statement or a number that doesn't quite add up, if you have been told to trust and have been trusting and are starting to feel the first faint vibration of something wrong, trust the vibration. Not the anxiety necessarily. Anxiety lies to us, catastrophizes, finds danger in safe places, but the specific low-frequency hum of something that doesn't add up, the thing that makes you pause over a bank statement, the question that forms in your mind and then gets managed away before you can finish asking it. Trust that. Write it down. Go to the county recorder's office. Hire the document examiner. Read every page. You are not being paranoid. You are being competent. And your competence, quiet, reliable, practiced, running in the background of someone else's louder story, is the most valuable thing you own. Do not let anyone manage you out of it. The truth does not expire. I found mine 3 years after it was buried. It was fully intact. It was waiting. I am not closing the door on trust, on relationships, on partnerships, on the specific vulnerability of building a life alongside another person. I am keeping the door, but I am the one who decides when it opens and how far and on what terms. I am the one with the deed now. My name on the paperwork. Mine. The kitchen smells like coffee in the mornings and the light comes in at an angle across the countertop I chose. And it is not everything I thought I would have at 41, but it is real and it is mine. And every morning when I put my hand on that cool surface I feel it, solid, present, not borrowed from someone else's vision. Built, finally, irreversibly, entirely built. If you're still in the middle of something like this, if you're in the 6 months of kitchen table nights, if you're waiting for the forensic report, if you're sitting across a conference room table from someone who counted on your patience being permanent, I need you to know that the patience was never weakness. It was just patience. And patience applied correctly at the right moment toward the right purpose is not a liability. It is a strategy. Use it.